The San Francisco Bay Area was once home to some of the largest and most ornate Gilded Age mansions, homes that rivaled European palaces with perfectly manicured gardens, full-time staff, and rooms clad in gold. But what happened? Why don't we see these grand residences dotting the bay anymore? Hi everyone, Ken here. Today we are uncovering the lost mansions of the Bay Area. Hit that subscribe button and let's explore this house. This episode is brought to you in part by Victorian Society in America. More on them later. To fully understand the fate of these remarkable estates, we need a bit of context on how the San Francisco Bay Area developed in the first place. The story of San Francisco starts in 1776 when Spanish settlers established the Presidio and the Mission San Francisco de Asís near the tip of the peninsula. This outpost grew slowly at first, but everything changed in 1848 when gold was discovered in the nearby foothills. By the following year, tens of thousands of fortune seekers flooded into the region. Almost overnight, a sleepy settlement was transformed into a bustling economic powerhouse, setting the stage for San Francisco's meteoric rise. This new wealth manifested in many ways, but none so visibly as the construction of grand estates. The Gilded Age, which spanned roughly from the 1870s to the early 1900s, saw the rise of railroad barons, shipping magnates, and real estate moguls who used their fortunes to build some of the most breathtaking mansions the West Coast had ever seen. Nob Hill became the unofficial capital of extravagance. Once a relatively undeveloped area, its steep slopes were soon dotted with the opulent homes of prominent families, including members of the so-called Big Four, who had amassed vast fortunes through the Central Pacific Railroad. Perhaps the most famous of the lost Nob Hill estates was Mark Hopkins' grand Victorian showpiece. Starting in 1875, at the request of his wife Mary, Mark Hopkins built an imposing mansion at the top of Nob Hill. So grand was the planned structure that it would take years to complete, as artists worked around the clock to detail not only its Gothic exterior, but its intricate interior as well. After 3 long years of construction, just as the house was beginning to take shape, Hopkins passed away while on a business trip. Much to everyone's surprise, and considering that he was only middle-aged, he had never created a will. He and Mary did not have any children of their own, though they did adopt their housekeeper's kid, Timothy. The courts ended up awarding everything to Mary, who was intent on finishing the house. Once everything was sorted out, Mary contacted the esteemed Herter brothers to finish the interior design work. That's when she met one of their most esteemed designers, Edward Francis Searles, who was young enough to be her son. Almost immediately, the two became an item, and Searles finished the house to both his own and Mary's taste. Entering the mansion, we pass through the vestibule where we find the walls clad in Circassian walnut with a built-in grandfather clock. Let's take the passage to the right. This leads us into the stair hall, where a grand, bifurcated staircase sweeps behind a 2-story arcade. From a frescoed ceiling framing a skylight to a built-in pipe organ defying gravity above the grand staircase, and intricate carvings found on almost every architectural element, the stair hall became an instant success amongst architectural critics. Just to give you an idea of the sheer scale of this room, with each floor containing double-height ceilings, we can notice how tiny the person in the sketch appears in front of the arcade. If you were visiting this house as a guest, the doorman would escort you to the reception room to await your host. From here you might be ushered into the parlor, boasting ornate built-ins, leaded stained glass windows, and a fireplace with built-in lanterns. While we only have this one glimpse into the dining room, we can imagine just how grand it truly was, from the intricate fireplace mantel to the built-in cabinets and hand-stenciled walls. Mary's bedroom continued with these grand displays of artistry, with the large ceiling frescoes soaring above Eastlake furniture. Some of the photos we have been seeing are from the house's next chapter when it served as the Mark Hopkins Institute of Art, such as the massive art gallery we are seeing now. Once again, to truly appreciate the scale of this room, we will refer to a drawing showing the art gallery as it relates to the rest of the mansion. After the Mark Hopkins mansion was completed, Mary and Edward married each other in 1887. Just 4 years later, Mary passed away and the entirety of the Hopkins estate, including real estate stocks and tens of millions of dollars, skipped Timothy Hopkins and was inherited by Edward. This led to a lengthy legal battle in which Edward admitted to the courts that he proposed to Mary in part for her money. Nonetheless, the courts sided with Edward, which left Timothy with nothing from his adopted parents. While it has never been proven, there were rumors that Edward had been having a secret affair and had been living with a lover around the time of Mary's passing. Timothy allegedly blackmailed Edward, who ended up privately settling the matter for a few million. At this point, the San Francisco mansion was conveyed to the Mark Hopkins Institute of Art, which converted many of the rooms for use as a school. Timothy was able to reclaim most of the furnishings, which is why we saw rooms such as the parlor with only wood benches to fill them. With so many empty rooms boasting double-height ceilings, the Institute was able to offer art classes with elaborate sets and plenty of space for painters and sculptors to let their imaginations run wild. Meanwhile, other members of the Big Four built their palatial mansions nearby on Nob Hill. Charles Crocker attempted to purchase the entire block in order to build his dream home. However, one resident of the block refused to sell to him. Instead of planting his gardens around his neighbor's house, he built a spike fence around it to completely block out the sunlight in an attempt to force him to move. Inside, the house was a veritable palace full of marble and exotic woods, but for reasons we'll soon learn, there aren't many photos left of it. Next door was the residence of Collisby Huntington, another member of the Big Four, but perhaps none were quite as lavish as the house across the street, the home of Leland Stanford, who was the first of the Big Four to build his mansion on Nob Hill back in 1875. It was designed to boast 50 rooms spread out over 41,000 square feet of lavish interior space. No expense was spared on his Italianate mansion clad with limestone and copper accents. Entering the home, you would pass through double doors and make your way from the antehall towards the rotunda, framed beyond marble columns boasting gilded capitals. As we continue forward, we begin to gain a sense of just how colossal this house truly was, and to make it appear even larger, mirrors were strategically placed in the corners. We won't go up the grand staircase yet to see what rests above the rotunda's oculus. Instead, let's turn around and begin exploring the rooms to either side of us. First, we are ushered into the reception room, with rugs tossed over carpets and drapes found pooling on the floor. This overabundance of rich textiles was meant to convey the excessive wealth of the family from the moment a visitor arrived. From the reception room, we will head into the drawing room, also known as the Pompeian drawing room for its illustrious frescoes. Set within an alcove is one of Stanford's most prized possessions, the Fountain of Love statue. We can move in closer to get a better look at its delicate features and further admire the finer details of the furnishings. Continuing our tour through the mansion, we find the gallery stretching away from the Pompeian drawing room. Bathing in natural light pouring in through a leaded skylight, Stanford displayed his extensive collection of paintings from the greats, some already several centuries old by the time he acquired them. Let's return to the entrance hall just below the rotunda. While we are here, we can look up, but only for a moment. We still have much more to see on the first floor before we explore the upper rotunda. Directly opposite of the reception room, we will enter the library, receiving direct sunlight through its massive bay window. On one side, the wall is dominated by the fireplace, the upper mantle of which soars 14 feet below the gilded frieze. Looking around, we find that half-height bookcases skirt the room, each book neatly organized with custom leather-bound covers. Adjoining the library and heading towards the rear of the house, we find the billiards room. Continuing forward, we find that we've only made it as far back as the staircase. Let's head through the opening on our left. This brings us to Mrs. Stanford's sitting room, also known as the ladies' sitting room. Here we can imagine her meeting with her friends and relatives for more intimate conversations and perhaps a more comfortable setting relative to what we have seen so far. On our way to one of the grandest rooms in the house, we pass from the ladies' sitting room and through the conservatory clad in antique French wall panels. This brings us to the dining room, where we can imagine the table set with all its leaves to host dinner parties in excess of 60 guests. To one side, below a delicately hand-stenciled ceiling, the indoor fountain trickled in a time when indoor plumbing was still novel. Facing the bay window and consuming nearly the entire wall, the buffet was hand-carved by a team of artists where it sat. With the gallery back in view through one of the dining room's openings, we can see that we've explored most of the first floor. Before we head back to the entrance hall and rotunda, we can peek into the breakfast room. This is where the family would have dined when they were not entertaining, allowing them to have a more casual time with one another. Let's step back into the rotunda and discover what wonders await us on the second floor. Arriving at the top of the staircase, we finally see the rotunda in all its glory, framed by a colonnade. The ceiling is decorated in elaborate murals meant to depict each continent. In this one we see Africa. To the other end, we see a depiction of Asia and steal a glimpse of what we can only imagine to be an intricate skylight crafted from wrought iron and set with leaded stained glass. Because we are guests in the Stanford house, we will see the blue and gold guest room first. From a marble fireplace to gilded accents and a mix of Greek and Pompeian motifs, this luxurious bedroom was meant to spoil guests. Mrs. Stanford's bedroom was every bit, if not more sumptuous, with a hand-sewn carpet spanning the floor and gilded festoons framing the ceiling's many murals. The view from her window allowed her to look out over the bay from the top of Nob Hill, but unfortunately, their life in this house was too good to last. In 1883, only 8 years after moving in, their only son passed away. Stricken with grief, they had the house emptied of all of its contents except for his bedroom, which they left as a shrine. The Stanfords, unable to bear any reminders of their late son, moved on to Menlo Park, only returning to mourn. Menlo Park at the time happened to be home to one of the richest men in the country, James Flood. James had grown up poor in New York, working throughout his childhood as a carriage maker to help his parents pay the bills. When he was 23, he set out west with the hopes of striking it rich in the gold rush, which actually panned out well for him, allowing him the opportunity to save some money for the first time in his life. With an entrepreneurial spirit, he opened a saloon, then when that became profitable, he opened a stock brokerage, then eventually a mining company that uncovered the Comstock lode. The Big Bonanza, as it was called, consisted of a silver core stretching 1,200 feet deep into the earth. When James announced the discovery, the mines were valued at $1 billion, the modern-day equivalent of about $25 billion. What followed was a frenzy in the stock market, and James saw an opportunity to manipulate the price of stocks as he learned new information about his mines. When it was all said and done, the mine produced about 1/10 of its estimated value before becoming unprofitable. But with insider knowledge, James was able to cash in long before it ran dry. With his new wealth, he set out to build his dream home. He purchased a lot in Menlo Park and constructed his 45,000 square foot mansion, which he named Linden Towers. The colossal 6-story Italianate palace was clad in limestone and embellished with intricate relief work and statuary. As we arrive from the street, the gatekeeper steps out from the gatehouse to greet us. The short side of the mansion comes into full view as we round the fountain, but we still have a long way to go before arriving at the front door. We must make our way down the winding gravel drive, meandering through the lush gardens. This takes us past a herd of cows grazing the pastures just outside of the barn. Then reaching off into the distance, we wonder where the garden walks might take us. Looking beyond Stone Sphinx, terrace gardens break away from the expansive lawns until finally Linden Towers can be seen coming into view. Let's dismount from our carriage and make our way towards the front door, but before we head inside, a quick word about the sponsor of today's video, Victorian Society in America. Are you captivated by historic architecture? Want to explore, learn, and dive even deeper into the past? With the Victorian Society in America, you'll have the chance to travel to American cities and tour stunning 19th century buildings, pursue learning through internationally acclaimed summer programs in American cities and abroad, including Chicago, Newport, and London to name a few. Additionally, members will enjoy a free subscription to 19th Century, the semi-annual publication packed with articles on art, architecture, preservation awards, and book reviews. Visit the website below in the video description and become part of the Victorian Society in America today. Thank you, Victorian Society in America, for sponsoring today's video. Now back to our tour. Swinging open the nearly 12-foot tall front doors, we arrive in the entrance hall, hearing the echoes of our footsteps dance across the marble mosaic floor. As we look straight ahead, the main hall stretches more than 100 feet below gilded ceilings, shimmering in the light of gold-plated chandeliers. To the right side, the smell of old leather-bound books tempts us into the library with hand-tooled leather walls and a ceiling that has been gold-leafed between its polished ebony beams. The library feeds us into the music room, where a grand piano is so well polished that it reflects the sun's light back into our faces. Directly across the main hall from the music room is the drawing room. Here we could find antique European chairs set out, one for each expected guest. And above us on the ceiling, a dramatic ecclesiastical mural is framed by intricate hand stenciling. Let's make our way back into the main hall, heading all the way to the end and turning left just before the door to the service wing. This brings us to the dining room, dramatically decorated with angels flying about overhead in the ceiling mural and gilded dragons resting behind the table supporting the fireplace's mantel. Though for a more casual dinner, the Floods could eat in the breakfast room in the service wing. Unfortunately, there are no known photos of the stair hall, Moorish smoking room, service wing, or children's dining room, but we can continue exploring the mansion from below the dome of the second-floor stair hall. James's bedroom was decorated with an eclectic mix of styles ranging from centuries-old furniture pieces to a unique mix of Eastlake and Baroque detailing. Mary's bedroom was more cohesive, with a matching bedroom set and a lively frieze running below murals framed by hand-stenciled borders. Her suite came complete with a large fireplace centered between windows and only the finest hand-sewn quilts and curtains money could buy. While no two bedrooms were identical, each one bore a strong resemblance to the last, with a writing desk in the middle of each room and canopies over each bed. Once completed, Linden Towers became the largest house west of the Rocky Mountains, but even so, the Floods spent very little time in it, only using the mansion to host large parties. They chose to instead live in their Nob Hill mansion in San Francisco, which continues to stand to this day. Speaking of which, back in San Francisco, Nob Hill was all but running out of space, but there was another enclave of incredibly wealthy families building their palatial homes along Van Ness Avenue. Van Ness around the turn of the century was thought of as the Bay Area's fanciest street, where all the best shops, restaurants, and churches were. You could see members of high society strolling about, ladies in grand dresses, and men in their finest suits. All up and down the avenue, mansions sprang up, creating a tight-knit neighborhood of the who's who of San Francisco. The corner lots were the most valuable at this time, giving the wealthy the chance to show off their incredible homes. You could see a range of styles, from the French Second Empire to the most flamboyant Italianates with Eastlake influences. Queen Anne's pierced the sky with their elaborate towers marking the intersections. This continued on for almost the entirety of the avenue, and even though any one of these might be considered showstoppers, there were two that stuck out above the rest. The Ash Hobart residence was decorated with just about every Victorian-era embellishment you can imagine. Its highly visible location saw crowds of thousands pass by during parades and other community events. And the interior was every bit as sumptuous, finished out with rich woodwork throughout and decorated by a vast art collection. Not too far away was the home of Klaus Spreckels, who had made his money through sugar plantations in Hawaii. In 1894, he purchased a large block of property on Van Ness, intending to build a grand mansion that would rival the homes up on Nob Hill. Designed in the popular chateauesque style with blown-out proportions, the mansion stood proudly on the street corner. The interior was every bit as grand as you might imagine, and it will take some imagination to see the details in the fire-damaged photos. Not only did he have a grand, two-story art gallery with leaded skylights, he had a jewel chamber which safeguarded diamonds and rubies and delicate jewelry. But this wasn't the only fancy area. On the other side of the bay around the same time, Oakland was seeing rapid growth. With several rail lines now running through it, the city became a hub of commerce, and for those seeking larger lots, it became quite attractive as an alternative to San Francisco. At first, upper-middle-class homes began lining the streets, but as the years rolled on, the lower-upper class began building their homes side by side. This led to streets that were full of character with a little more room to spread out. Then came homes that were entirely in their own category, the extravagant estates of the ultra-wealthy. This brings us to Francis Marion Smith, who, like many other men, headed out west in search of gold. Long story short, he didn't find any, but what he did find was ulexite, which he processed into borax. The iconic 20 mule team borax brand emerged from this era, named after the long mule teams used to transport borax from remote mines to railheads. Smith's advertising manager, Stephen Mather, played a crucial role in popularizing his brand, which became a household name and cemented Smith's reputation as the Borax King. This made him an absolute fortune, and in the early 1880s, he purchased 35 acres in Oakland, California, and began planning not only a mega mansion, but extensive grounds to accompany it. Before the mansion was built, work started on the extensive grounds. As we wind about the property known as Arbor Villa, we'll discover some truly fascinating structures and amenities. The first building to catch our eye rises 5 stories above the tree line. This is the observation tower, where Smith could look out across the bay and all of Oakland from the top of the hill. As the months passed, new structures popped up all around the grounds. Let's head inside the glass dome building at the base of the observation tower. This is the hothouse, filled with exotic plants meant to grow year-round in high humidity. Let's take the drive and travel away from these buildings. As we wind about the property, we encounter dirt paths lined with native grasses. Some of these paths lead us to swimming holes, such as this one, while others lead us to water gardens overgrown with lily pads. Never knowing what might be at the end of the next path, let's continue in anticipation. As the trees clear, we find pastures where the groundskeepers were responsible for maintaining the deer and rabbit population, ensuring the property was always teeming with life. Of course, an estate of such magnitude required dozens of groundskeepers who all lived in cottages like this one. As the grounds began to take shape, Smith and his wife opened their piece of paradise to the public for numerous events, including fundraisers to benefit Mrs. Smith's charity, which provided homes to orphan girls. Finally, 13 years after purchasing the land and developing it into a private park, the house, known separately as Oak Hall, was ready for the Smiths to move in. The 42-room mansion was designed by architect Walter Matthews and cost $275,000 to complete, the modern equivalent of just over $10 million when adjusting for inflation alone. To enter the mansion, we will head up a few steps to find the front door, off-center from the porch. Continuing inside brings us to the entrance hall, octagonal in plan and filled to the brim with antiques and artwork. Resting at the base of the stairs, we can look up past the bronze newel post and peer through the oculus to see the bellows of the built-in pipe organ piercing the ceiling overhead. Before we continue deeper into the mansion, we can pause to admire the smaller details, and while the stair hall might make a grand impression, it is far from the most impressive room in the house. From the stair hall, we will continue into the music room, doubling as the lesser ballroom. The walls are adorned with intricate murals displaying scenes from antiquity, while hand-stenciled ceilings frame ecclesiastical murals above us. In the bay window, we find a marble statue towering above the gilded piano, where we can imagine a full-time musician gently playing throughout each day. Let's move along to the library, clad floor-to-ceiling in rich, old-growth wood. Not only is it lit by electric lights, but multicolored light penetrates this cavernous space through the stained glass windows above the half-height bookcases. Next up is the billiards room beyond a solid wood archway spanning over 20 feet. This room continues the same decorative motifs as the library, but with a Moorish flair in its furnishings. This eclectic mix of styles is something we can see play out in each room, such as the dining room, which has a traditional hutch paired with an exceedingly modern dining set for the time, as well as a glass curtain wall. Though some rooms are more true to a single style, such as the white and gold salon with gilded plasterwork on the cove ceiling. Let's return to the grand staircase now and make our way up to the second floor. At the landing, we can clearly make out the details of each newel post and notice a band of egg and dart molding on the stepped wall panels, details that might otherwise be lost when the silk wallpaper dominates our visual field. This feeds us into the rotunda where all of these aforementioned details come together. Directly across from us is the organ loft, and to the side of that is a minstrel gallery where multiple musicians would have been playing their instruments out of sight from guests. Also found about the rotunda is the family dining room, a much more comfortable and relaxed space where the family could enjoy their meals. Up here we'll find 15 bedrooms, though we won't look at all of them. The greatest room in the house is yet to be seen, so we'll just see these 3 before continuing along. Finally, we make our way into the great ballroom, which was designed to hold hundreds of guests. Not only is there a stage with professional lighting, but the ceiling overhead is domed with alcoves branching off for more intimate sitting areas. Unfortunately, Mrs. Smith passed away in 1905, only being able to enjoy the mansion for about 10 years. Mr. Smith, however, remarried and lived out the rest of his life enjoying Arbor Villa and Oak Hall. Following Mrs. Smith's passing, another estate went up nearby. In 1858, Philip Bowles was born into humble means, being raised by his mother after his father's untimely death the following year. After graduating from UC Berkeley, he went to work as a clerk at the First National Bank, but quickly rose through the ranks in his career and was soon named the president of the American Bank. By his late 40s, he had married the love of his life, Mary, and amassed a fortune. In 1909, Philip and Mary Bowles purchased 51 acres in Oakland. The site they chose was nestled high up on a hill with sweeping views of the bay below. The couple then hired architect L.B. Dutton to design for them a 22-room Italian villa-style mansion with a 4-story tower which was completed in 1911. To enter the property, we will find the gate along the former Prospect Drive near Broadway Terrace. As we begin winding our way through the heavily forested estate, we will pass by dozens of species of trees. Continuing on, we almost forget that we are not in a park as the salty breeze gently rocks the native grasses. All around us, garden paths trail off into the forest, and while we might be here for the house, we can enjoy a detour along the way. We find a series of pergolas and garden gates gently guiding us downhill. This leads us to an elevated gazebo overlooking the secluded swimming pool. Continuing along, we encounter bridges spanning small ponds, and by this point, we can't even hear the outside world, just the chirping of birds. And as we near the house, we might find Philip and Mary taking a leisurely stroll through their garden, something the couple love to do together. Though the entire estate isn't completely natural, there are terraced lawns lined by stone balustrade, and had we stayed on the drive, we would have eventually spotted the back of the house overgrown in ivy and pulled through the porte cochere. But we won't take the back door. Let's continue around to the front and find the main entrance below the tower. We pass under the tower stairs, making our way into the entry hall. Continuing down a few steps, we find a sunken great hall beyond a colonnade. To one end is the floor-to-ceiling limestone fireplace flanked by passageways concealed by velvet curtains. To the other end is the gallery, where the Bowles display their most prized artwork. Next we find the dining room, finished out with damask wallpaper and glass-paned doors, though the Bowles only used this room while they were entertaining. The breakfast room was far more comfortable for their daily meals, and the French doors could be opened outward to break down the barrier between indoor and outdoor living. Had we continued through the dining room's corner door, we would have stepped down into the conservatory. Just like the breakfast room, all the doors could be open to the outside. This idea of indoor-outdoor living was important to the Bowles. Philip's study even had a Juliet balcony looking into the garden. The study was also skirted with half-height bookcases and staged with comfortable furniture, making it truly livable. In ensuring every comfort for his wife, Philip not only had a fireplace installed in Mary's study, but also had a radiator placed right next to her desk. Though if the two were ever working on something together, they could sit opposite each other at their shared desk in the den. Heading upstairs, we find the couple's bedroom, with each of them having their own beds. Curiously, the guest rooms were arranged the same way, with separate beds for each spouse. The Bowles enjoyed their piece of paradise until 1926, when Philip passed away. In honor of her late husband, Mary had Bowles Hall constructed as a gift to UC Berkeley, where Philip had served as a regent in his twilight years. But that's getting a bit ahead. Let's backtrack a little bit for an honorable mention. While not a house per se, the Cliff House was a staple of high society in the Bay Area. In 1863, the first Cliff House was built by Senator John Buckley and C.C. Butler, who opened its doors as a restaurant and saloon. Initially, it was a remote haven, accessible mostly by horseback and frequented by riders, hunters, and picnickers. As San Francisco grew and the city expanded its infrastructure, the establishment's fortunes changed with the opening of the Point Lobos Toll Road in 1864, making it a popular destination for San Francisco's carriage trade. The adjacent 2-mile speedway added to its allure, drawing the city's elite to race their horses. Omnibuses, railways, and streetcars brought visitors to the edge of the Golden Gate Park, from where stagecoaches completed the journey. The area's popularity surged, partly due to the nearby Seal Rocks, a favorite spot for crowds of all ages to gather and watch sea lions. After 2 decades, Adolf Sutro, a silver magnate, purchased the Cliff House. His tenure saw both triumph and tragedy. In 1887, the north wing was destroyed by an explosion from the grounded schooner Parallel. Instead of abandoning the property, Sutro rebuilt the Cliff House, only to have it completely destroyed by fire again 7 years later. Undeterred, Sutro reconstructed it in 1896 as a 7-story Victorian chateau, affectionately known as the Gingerbread Palace. This period coincided with the construction of the nearby Sutro Baths, enhancing the area's recreational appeal. The Cliff House grew into more than just a restaurant and saloon. It was now a high-end hotel with lavish interiors. It became a gathering place for the social elite, where we can imagine men wearing their finest suits and ladies donning Victorian-era gowns strewn with pearls. From here, families could take a stroll along the beach as they made their way to the Sutro Baths, which boasted the world's largest indoor swimming pool. In addition to the water slides and 6 saltwater pools, the Sutro Baths also included an amphitheater, skating rink, and a museum. As time went on, the grounds surrounding both the Cliff House and Sutro Baths were landscaped with extensive gardens. Along the cliffside, marble statues dotted walking paths amidst hundreds of species of imported plants and flowers. If you are familiar with San Francisco's history, you already know that the 1906 earthquake nearly wiped the city off the face of the earth. Surprisingly, the Cliff House and Baths stood strong, with negligible damage. All was fine until the next year. On the 7th of September in 1907, just after the sun set, fire broke out. The flames were unable to be quelled, and the inferno raged, consuming the Cliff House for several days until there was hardly anything left of it. Though as mentioned earlier, the 1906 earthquake devastated the city of San Francisco. Many homes and buildings were not built with flexible materials that could withstand shaking, leading to many of them crumbling. Of those that stood strong, the subsequent fires raged through and left almost nothing unscathed. This was the case for the Big Four's mansions on Nob Hill, all of which were lost in the events following the earthquake. In that same event, Van Ness Avenue was essentially used as a fire break. In a desperate attempt to keep the fire from consuming more of the city, the US Army blew up the buildings on the street using dynamite, which ultimately proved unsuccessful, leaving nearly nothing recognizable on what had been the city's hottest street. Linden Towers, the home of James Flood, passed in and out of the family for decades. It was eventually purchased by developers who imploded it and buried the remains under the Lindenwood housing development. And a similar fate was shared by both of the estates we saw in Oakland, which were both demolished and subdivided for new construction. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. What are your thoughts? Did anything in this video stick out to you? Let me know down below in the comments, and be sure to share any stories you might have of Old Bay Area mansions that are gone but not forgotten. I'd also like to extend another huge thank you to the Victorian Society in America for sponsoring today's video. Make sure to check out their link in the video description to learn more about their upcoming tours and preservation efforts. As always, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time on This House.